Okay, so you know, I want to start this off by asking you a question. I haven't asked you. I've been wanting to ask you though for a while. How did you meet Redeemed Zoomer? How'd that all start?
Yeah, I met him through the Discord, the Operation Reconquista Discord.
Hmm.
I was this was in its infancy, and I was one of the few active people in the PCUSA Discord. And
Hmm.
after Reformation Day in was it 2022, um,
Hmm.
we really started to keep going as an organization after we posted our 95 theses on doors of the PCUSA and sent them in
Right, right.
emails and letters, and uh, then after that, uh, people could see I was committed, and then we ended up forming Presbyterians for the Kingdom out of it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's based. That's based. That's based. So, you found him obviously through. Did you find him through YouTube originally?
Yeah, I did.
Hmm.
It was cool to see another dude interested in orthodoxy in the PCUSA
Yeah.
online,
Yeah.
especially someone with that big a platform.
Hmm. Yeah. I found him through um, the was the history of Christianity in such and such minutes or less. Um, or yeah, the history of Christianity, I guess that's what the title was. And I found it through another dude I watched for just history videos, and he was reacted to it and stuff. I was like, so I'll check this guy out. So I looked him up, and I found his video on the Calvinist view of the Lord's Supper. It was the first video I found. And being a very Southern Baptist person at the time, when I found him, I looked at his video, and he was saying that he said, "This is why we believe that we truly feast on Christ's Lord's Supper." And I remember immediately I flipped off the video. I just shut it down. I was like, "Oh, nope, nope, that's not true." Them Presbyterians, they're halfway Catholic. So immediately I was I mean, I was very closed off to anything that wasn't like Southern Baptist. Anything that reeked of papism to me, to my nose, I
Right.
I I wasn't down with it, right? Um, but slowly I watched some of his other videos and started coming, let me see what he has to say about this topic. And so he was a big driving force actually in me becoming Presbyterian. Or actually, I mean, he himself didn't convert me, I wouldn't say, but he got me into studying these scholastics and the theologians in church history. Although church history, that was more of my my Anglican Bible teacher, Father Foster, did that. Who's still dismayed that I'm not Anglican, but
Yeah.
Um, so your family, if I'm not mistaken, you've got quite a few family members, who've been pastors in the PCUSA. Is that a correct thing?
Yeah, my uncle is a Presbyterian pastor, and he's been overseas for a good while. But
Mhm.
he was ordained in the PCUSA, but he's been overseas as a missionary. And my great uncle who baptized me was also a PCUSA minister. I actually believe he started in the PCUS, which was the old Southern Church, before
Oh.
it merged back with the UPC USA back in
Mhm.
'83, I think.
Mhm.
And so he was in the Southern Church. And then I've got a great grandfather who was like a circuit rider in Texas, uh, who was a Presbyterian minister and
Mhm.
helped establish churches out in West Texas. And yeah, so I've got a lot of Texas specific Presbyterian heritage. But if you trace my lineage back far enough, then you'll find that I was a descendant of John Knox.
Mhm.
So I guess it's just in our blood.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. In Reconquista we have you, the son of John Knox, and people know that I'm descended from Luther, which is, unlike you, I rejected my lineage and blood pull towards Lutheranism, and just went along being Presbyterian. Although we did have a goofy moment where I almost became Lutheran, but we don't have to talk about that. We don't have to talk about that. Oh man. So you're your family's been in Texas for how long?
Man, I actually have on my mom's side. I think that we've been in Texas since I had an ancestor who was in the Alamo, so
Oh, okay.
pre-statehood, or pre like the Republic of Texas, which was like 1835 to 1836 to 1845, and then we became a state in 1845.
Right.
And so yeah, pre Texas as a country or as a state. So when it was a province of Mexico.
Mm-hmm. That's crazy, man. That's wild. I don't
Yeah.
think my family didn't have ties much. I mean, North Carolina, I would say, would be the place we've stayed the longest. So, um, for a bit of context, for people who don't know my family lineage, I am ethnically Scottish, despite being descended from Luther. I think the German part of my family migrated to Scotland for a little bit, became Presbyterian, as you do, and then they were part of the first movement of Scots Irish over into the New World. But so the oldest truly American ancestor I can trace back to is actually Alexander Hamilton. So I've got double famous relatives in me. Um, Although I don't really agree with much of his politics, but anyway. Um, so he's the one that brings the family over, my lineage family over into America. And so we're in New York for a little bit, and then, stuff goes down with him, and my side of the family leaves and goes down south in North Carolina, where, we've been for about since the 1840s now.
Yeah. But
Um,
by stuff going down with him, do you mean that he was slain in a duel?
yeah, that's pretty much what happened. And then people got the family kind of fell apart after that.
Right, naturally.
Right, yeah. And naturally, once the patriarch is dead, everyone runs away. So they left for North. I think my great grandfather fought in the Civil War for the South. Don't hold it against me. I know, whatever.
Well, yeah,
Um,
same here. But
yeah. I mean, here's dude. Yeah. So don't tell Richard. Don't tell Richard. I don't want him to
yeah,
know that. Uh, but so when did you become a Christian? So I mean, I know there's the possibility of infant faith, but when did you become a Christian, or have you always been a Christian?
I mean, I think my earliest memory is praying with my parents, maybe when I was 3 or 4,
Hmm.
accepting Jesus into my heart. I think that's my earliest recollection of anything, um, which it didn't seem so, cataclysmic and life altering at the time.
Hmm.
But I think that through the rest of my experience of, being raised in the church and, um, choosing to go to church on my own, when I'm out of the house, out of my parents' place, I think that in some weird way, I recollected that despite it not being, going down a slide with my dad, uh, that kind of exhilaration, that kind of feeling. But yeah, I would definitely say when I was 3 or 4. Um, Now, infant faith, yeah, that's a different discussion. I would say that I had an infant faith until I was like 22. Um,
Hmm.
you know, I, but it matters not the maturity of the faith, right? That's not what God looks at. He looks at if you have Christ, and then if you have Christ, then Christ covers you. You're in the shadow of His wings. But
Hmm.
um, definitely the sanctification process was a long one for me. Definitely
Hmm.
fell into some of the uh, wilder parts of college, and then
Hmm.
sort of came back to God. Uh, in it, I wouldn't say like I ever lost my faith, but so I just came to follow Him more closely, about 3 or 4 years ago. And yeah, man, it's been great. How about you?
Well, I was brought up in a Southern Baptist church. I was baptized when I was 6 years old. Don't know how much I understood of what was going on then.
What do you
I,
mean?
I,
I thought that that's the age of accountability, and you can.
oh my gosh, the edge of accountability. Good grief. No, 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 no. So actually, though, when growing up, my parents were at work most all the time. So I spent most of my time with my grandparents, right? My grandmother, my grandfather on my mom's side, and they really brought me up in the faith. And I feel like I understood in like kind of what was going on. I mean, I could answer like basic questions about I could give you Sunday school answers, essentially what I'm saying. Um, and I did show an interest in scripture from an early age, which led a lot of people who knew me to believe to believe I was touched by God. But as I got older, I started really rebelling against that, especially when you get to middle school, right? And was involved in a lot of bad stuff in middle school. Really did not. I lived like a devil. Um, I remember, I got into 3 fights in sixth grade over stupid things. But
Did you win?
um, did I win? I won two. I won two. I lost the other one because I chickened out. I do remember that. Yeah,
Yeah.
the kid was so much bigger than me. I was chickened out, but I did win two. So that's the important thing. Is I won two of it, 2 out of 3. Man, I'll take the winning record.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but after eighth, I moved into ninth grade, and I had this really great Bible teacher. Again, was the Anglican priest named Father Foster, who really got me reading the Bible again and studying church history and studying theology. And he's the one who got me into that. He taught me who John Calvin was because he was a Reformed Anglican.
Mhm.
Um, so and I don't believe I was really saved until the summer of ninth grade year, going into 10th grade year. Um, because then that was the moment when my life really actually changed. Now it didn't change, because it was a night and day difference, but it wasn't. It didn't like I didn't like the sanctification process took some time. I had really wrecked a lot of my relationships. We had to get over that or get through that rather. But you know, God, God has shown great mercy through all of that. Now, sadly, a lot of the people whom I reconciled with now can't stand the thought of me because I am no longer Baptist. Um, so it's funny because I did all that work, and that's something I had struggled with for a while because I did all that work reconciling myself with people I had hurt just for them to turn around and turn their backs on me and stab me in the back, and I'm
Mhm.
kind of viewed as a traitor uh, by them. But yeah, that's kind of my story. Uh, trying to think of the question I want to ask. So, um, why haven't you left the PCUSA, man? I mean, don't you know that it's apostate? It's so terribly liberal that there's no saving it. Just run
Yeah.
away to your PCA church on the corner in the strip mall.
Well, I mean, I think that in some contexts, if the church that's best, in your area that you can feasibly make the church is not PCUSA, then by all means. Um, I think that one of the reasons that I cared and stayed is because it's the heritage that America was built on. There's some, it's not just about like old buildings and pretty buildings and or any of that. It's about uh, ultimately about Christ. But I just don't have. It doesn't sit well with me that my grandfather endowed an entire seminary that has actual pagans at it now. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm not just gonna like sit idly by and uh, I should say my great great uncle. I think I said grandfather, but um, I'm not just gonna sit idly by and watch it just go to shreds because woe is me. I'll go to a different one. But I think that the main reason is that it's the church that nurtured my faith. It's where I was baptized. It's where I was confirmed. It's the church I still care about. And all for everyone who says that like the PCUSA is apostate, you just have like no idea what you're talking about. I mean, generally it is a majority liberal denomination, but the conservatives that are in the PCUSA are bigger than the OPC, like by a mile. Like I'm thinking of like two churches right now that are conservative, just two that are bigger than the RPCNA itself. And so, it's there's a sizable amount of people that I also just don't feel comfortable with throwing to the wolves, to be honest with you. There's hundreds of thousands of conservatives in the PCUSA. And I mean, the PCUSA is like, in political conservatism and theological conservatism are not the same thing. But I mean, there's more political conservatives in the PCUSA than there is the Roman Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodox, despite all the, base trad LARPers online who make TikToks about how woke Protestantism is and, whatever. But I think that I have felt called to, and this is tentative because I'm not sure if I'm for sure about it, but I think I've felt called to be a pastor within the PCUSA and help foster change within the denomination, and just do what I can. I mean, I feel like in my role as president of Presbyterians for the Kingdom that I've kind of branched out from the original question, but in my role from Presbyterians for the Kingdom, I think that my motto is that if I can guard the local witness of just one church, then I think that we will have succeeded in our mission. I mean, of course, we want to reform the whole church, but if just one church is reformed through our, through our advocacy or through our theological materials online, then I think that we will have succeeded, and then it will all been worth it.
Right. I think there are quite a few of us who are looking at becoming pastors in the PCUSA, and yourself, me, Dexton is, quite a few of us are.
RZ.
RZ, yeah. We're all going to be Zuriel. Yeah, I forgot about that. That's right. I know, because for a while he was like, I'm just going to be the chill elder. But I think he's come around to that. Yeah, exactly. Elders and deacons are just as important as the pastors. God, there's just so much I want to ask. I mean, especially, after my recent discussions with a bunch of retreatists on Discord, there's so much juiciness to get to. So, golly, there's so many questions running through my head, but so how do you see what for you defines a church as a conservative church?
Yeah. I think generally a conservative church is going to be one that takes God's word seriously. And I think that I don't think that the ordination, I think here's what I'm going to get people in the comments going crazy. I don't think the ordination of women is a litmus test for how seriously one takes scripture. I know lots of conservatives that are for the ordination of women, and lots of conservatives that are against, who take the Bible equally as serious. And I think that if you look at the fellowship community's essential tenets, then I think that that's a pretty good place to start. I think that a conservative church generally is going to be one that is not hyper focused on the issues of the day or politics. By conservative, I think you want to distinguish between political conservatism and theological conservatism. Theological conservatism is just called Christianity. And so I think that if someone preaches the gospel of Jesus Christ and holds to the essentials of the faith, uh, and what God plainly says in His Word, I think then that constitutes a conservative church. Because I think you can get into this sort of spiral, and you've seen it within the Presbyterian Church, like you've seen it with the Marrow controversy and the seceders and the Associate Presbyterian, right? Then you've seen it with people who refuse to be in communion with one another because they vote for candidates. And so, whether they're right or not is kind of besides the point. They can get so down in the weeds that the public unity of the church is hurt, and the witness of the church is hurt by everyone just branching off. And I think that it's a little simplistic to just say, every Reformed tradition that's not PSUSA was just a branch off. In many cases, that is true. But in many cases, it's also not. But I think that for me, what I would look for in a church is, do you believe the Bible is the infallible Word of God? Do you confess the creeds, the Apostles' and Nicene Creed, and Athanasian's just a bonus? And how seriously do you take the Westminster standards? I am a Westminster supremacist, but I think that there's a lot of people who just have a disdain for Westminster. They see it as rigid or what have you. It's a pretty good indicator of how someone views the Westminster Confession of Faith. Is are they liberal or not? So,
yeah. So another quick question: is believing that women pastors are valid but improper, is that heresy, Mr. Yancey?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I wouldn't say that even thinking they're valid and proper is heresy. I don't understand the argument there. I'm not sure how that comes to the level of talking about the nature of God. I think people really throw around the word heresy like just because they think it's a cool word to label their enemies, and it's just like they don't even know what it means.
Right.
So, like, you can be like in Presbyterians for the Kingdom, you can we allow a latitude for this, right? Like, you can be a part of it if you think women's ordination is good, and you can be a part of it if you think it's bad. I think that there's just far greater issues in the main line right now than whether or not we should ordain women. And that's that's just not a concern at the moment when you have actual atheists in the main lines. So
Right. Yeah, I didn't understand that argument. I mean, again, consider, my grandmother always told me, consider the source that this is coming from. So you got to do that. I mean, I never understood that argument either, but I just wanted to, it's funny that I just had that conversation that we have to do this episode. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. And now we've got all the retreatists in our comments telling us that actually we are heretics. But it's okay. Like Richard said, we don't debate them. We just cope and we just conquer and let them cope. So the next question I was going to ask is, so what trying to figure out the right way to ask this. So, I've been accused of slandering a saint by using Saint Athanasius as an example of a successful Reconquista, right? So, could you explain for those listening in here, may not be familiar with this concept, why Saint Athanasius is a good example for Reconquista, successful Reconquista?
Sure. I think that if you look at the current state of the PCUSA, I think that about 20% of the denomination's pastors are conservative, which is a shame.
Mm.
But in Athanasius' day, it was 300 something overseers who were, or bishops, presbyters, whatever you want to call them, who were legitimately not Christian.
Mhm.
I think he was the only one at the time of the Arius controversy who held to the divinity of Christ, and I think that whether someone gets sexuality wrong, which again the main lines tend to do at the current state, is far less bad than denying the divinity of Christ. Uh,
Mhm.
and don't get me wrong, like it's still bad, and you can see the cultural decay that's come from sort of mainline apathy towards uh, the sexual revolution and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
uh, I think Athanasius is uh, a really good example of someone who didn't take his ball and go home when he lost the game, and just kept fighting and fighting. And uh, we can thank him largely for the Trinitarian faiths. I mean, he's not the only one, obviously, that God wouldn't have allowed it to completely die, but God definitely worked through Athanasius to preserve the Trinitarian faith.
Mhm. A lot of where we've gotten at this point is due to a lot of conservative cowardice. And where do you think that cowardly attitude, that retreatist attitude that conservatives have? In my book, my upcoming book, Killing Liberalism, I call it the spirit of Machen. Um, where do you think that attitude comes from ultimately?
Well, yeah, I that's interesting that you have that interpretation of Machen. I don't know if I would go as far, but I would say that uh, I think that for Machen, for instance, uh, I think it was largely a show trial, um, and he was defrocked. And I mean, I think that he was a valid minister. I think he was wrapped around the axle on a lot of things, but I think Richard Burnett's book on this sort of talks about the hope of Machen's hope is what it's
Mm.
called. Dr. Richard Burnett is the editor of Theology Matters, and he's basically saying that Machen's hope was not necessarily to see endless schism in the church, um, but in his actions he did cause schism. Albeit the OPC is so small, and it was so small that it didn't have a massive impact. But I mean, you could see in the UPC USA back then that the people who left did have an impact on the denomination, and the UPC USA uh, became majority liberal far faster than did the PCUS, which was the Southern Church,
Right.
which didn't really have a Machen equivalent that got uh, sort of defrocked. Um, I will say where I think it comes from, though, is we like to be in comfortable spaces. And I think part of that just has to do with Western civilization. We're just hyper comfortable. And I think part of that has to do with the liberals can agree to disagree on things of not first importance, but the conservatives, for whatever reason, cannot do that.
Mhm.
Um, they're far, and I think it also has to do with. I think that the convictions that conservatives hold are far more sincere. As far as if we're talking theological convictions, I
Mhm.
think that they're far more sincere and um, I think obviously far more well thought out and studied. Um, but I think the curse of that is that you have a lot of people who are grasping at their pearls The second, something that challenges their definition of theological conservatism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, like, for instance, like the PCA started in part because they didn't like that ministers were in the PCUS were preaching against segregation. That was one of the reasons, which they have repented of, and I laud them for that.
Mm-hmm.
But like they couldn't see, like, as heinous as segregation was, right, and just how many atrocities were committed against people of color in this nation. They like, the first importance is, do you confess Christ as Lord and Savior? And they split off and made a whole denomination because they didn't like that ministers were using their pulpit for politics, which is very understandable. Now, what I think the sort of actually, there's an article about this. Are you familiar with National Review?
I am, yes.
Okay, so Jack Butler wrote this article called "The Hollowing Out of an American Church,"
Mm-hmm.
and he talks about how there were times in history where the mainline church, when it spoke, everyone listened. They had a moral sort of clutch over the nation, and we were better for it, right? It spoke out against slavery. It spoke out against, the oppression of colored people. Spoke out against segregation. Those were moral necessities. Now, what's different these days is that the main lines think that they have to speak to every political issue. And so they issue out, I think Jack Butler calls them unread statements on every transient political issue, and that every issue has become a crisis to them. And they've used their voice so much, especially since the 1960s, that now when there's, if there is a moral obligation to speak, they've already spoken so much that everyone's tuned them out. And so, in a sense, I do understand the idea of not touching on politics from the pulpit, but I also, know that there are times where there is a moral obligation. And I mean, I think that, I know I've certainly felt uncomfortable in church with my political convictions being challenged. But I think Jonathan Edwards said, if you didn't offend anyone in your sermon, you didn't preach.
Right.
So the church has a witness to maintain. I would just, argue that it shouldn't be on every issue that they should, raise their voice. But that's kind of an aside from the retreatist thing. But yeah, I think that with every, like schism or branch off, that is just left instead of like fighting to try to reform the denomination, it has just left the denomination in a state of shambles. I mean, like, I'm thinking to myself, like, right now in the Presbytery fight, right, about amendments 24A and C, and I'm thinking to myself, dude, if a lot of those, and it's not so simplistic. I mean, in some presbyteries, they did not, allow these tall steeples to call pastors that were conservative. So I understand, if you can't call a pastor, like, safeguarding the local church is the most important issue. But if a lot of these tall steeples that didn't need to leave the PCUSA based on presbytery dynamics had stayed, I mean, conservatives might be in the majority, and that's just
Mhm.
from the last split of eco, in
Mhm.
2012 and through 2014. Uh, and I just, can only imagine if EPC had stayed, we probably would not have even got to the point where eco was needed to be, where eco thought they needed to form, right? So
Mhm.
I think that conservatives need to learn to agree to disagree, to uh, promote, you know, the truest doctrine to the most amount of people. And I think that the main line has the best opportunity to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, there was someone, a former friend of mine, who was in my comment section on the video I did with Zoomer, and said, what we actually should do is we should just get the EPC, the PCA, and the OPC, and all these people, just all unite all of the conservatives and create one conservative. And I responded to that by saying, look, that's a great idea, but the problem is they won't unite with each other. The problem is the PCA is not going to unite with the EPC, and the EPC is not going to unite with the ECO, and such and such and such. They're not going to unite with each other because each of them has a- each of them holds different things to be fundamentals that others do not. So, ECO allows women pastors, and so does the EPC, and so they're never going to unite with the PCA. The PCA would never unite with them, although maybe the PCA is drifting a little liberal, but we're not getting into that right now. And the OPC is certainly just gonna not unite. The OPC is like the Amish or Presbyterians. They just kind of hide in their bubble and just do whatever.
Yeah, I don't understand why OPC and PCA are not already merged. That's makes very little sense to me.
Right. Yeah. Right. Um. So. My next question though is, so if there's young men, like we're saying, a lot of us are going to go to seminary and become pastors. So if there's a young man wanting to go to seminary, what seminary would you recommend?
I think I'd recommend two. And here's I think that there's a lot of really good Reformed seminaries that are from denominations like PCA or OPC, uh, Covenant and Westminster, respectively, that are good seminaries. Um, However, I think there's a connotation that comes with going to one of those two, and I'm not trying to bash it. There's a connotation of rigidity, and
Mhm.
so if you want to be ordained in like the PCA or the OPC, I mean the OPC might. I mean, they may accept Covenant grads. I don't know. I know that the PCA accepts Westminster grads, but um, I think that it's limiting to go to a place like that. And I don't say a place like that in a bad way, but the connotation that has is, rigid and fundamentalist. What you should do, in my opinion, is, and I think that you can go from, uh, and I mean, I would say we need a lot of conservative ministers in PCUSA, so I'd really say, go for the PCUSA. But I
Mhm.
think you can go from like a mainline conservative seminary to all of the above, right? Um, as opposed to, if you go to Westminster, like you're dead in the water almost certainly in the PCUSA,
Mhm.
maybe even ECO, and you might get ordained in some places in the EPC. Um, but like, let's say, and this is where I would recommend going. We have a collaboration our organization does with Theology Matters with the University of Dubuque Theological Seminary, and they have
Mhm.
a Master's of Arts in Reformed Theology, and you can get that and then go and get an MDiv elsewhere, and it will your credits will transfer. Now, I would do that, or I would do Western Theological Seminary. They are in Holland, Michigan, in their RCA, but they are, and the RCA is less liberal than a lot of the mainline churches. But the Western Theological Seminary is distinctly conservative and orthodox within the RCA. I think they have an
Mhm.
independent board, but they've got just really genius professors. And we met one at the Theology Matters conference, Hanloin
Right.
Concert Online,
Right. She was
Uh,
fantastic.
yeah, really good Augustine scholar, and Suzanne MacDonald's a really good scholar as well. And I think that especially with like Dutch Reformed seminaries, you can go from Dutch Reformed to Presbyterian. Like there's not a significant difference between the two traditions that they're going to deny someone who went to a Dutch Reformed seminary. But I would say there, University of Dubuque Theological Seminary, or I would say Calvin Theological Seminary too is a good option. The CRC. I think that. I mean, I'm going to go visit Western here pretty soon, so I'll report back on that one. But my Western experience thus far has been good in the people I've interacted with, and they believe the Bible to be the infallible Word of God. They've got a statement about that, and that's really hard to find in mainline seminaries. But they've got all the perks of a mainline seminary in that they have large endowment. It's been around since like 1865. They have a ginormous library, famous alumni, like not my cup of tea necessarily, but Bobby Schuller was definitely very, very influential. Built the Crystal Cathedral. You should look that up because that's a beautiful piece of artwork in architecture done just fantastic. But yeah, I think that those three are the ones I would look at, and particularly the Theology Matters program at Dubuque. They have that's mint. It sounds like almost like a like an echo chamber for just like nerdy Reformed people to go and be nerdy and Reformed. But it's actually meant for to create pastors. Like all of these people, all the professors in the Masters of Art and Reformed Theology program have been pastors. A lot of them are retired from PCUSA, Tall Steeples, like First Pres Tulsa or First Pres San Diego or what have you. And so that's another one I would pay special attention to.
Yeah. No Princeton Theological Seminary?
Yeah, I mean, look, so Princeton, they do have an evangelical student fellowship. The problem with Princeton at the moment is that a lot of their professors that were conservative, because it used to be like a conservative stomping ground maybe 20 or 30 years ago. A lot of them have died or retired and just either aren't being replaced or are being replaced by liberals because conservatives left the PCUSA. And so, I mean, look, Princeton's good if you are like just a warrior Christian and can withstand some pretty out there stuff. But as far as resources go, Princeton's like the best in America, regardless of denomination. I mean, they have some things in their library that are just like incredible. I mean, like stuff that John Witherspoon wrote, or like, stuff that Jonathan Edwards wrote that is like, not only is it first edition, it's like first writing. This was not printed. This was written. Like, so, yeah, I mean, there is an Evangelical Student Fellowship Association at Princeton. I would just say, if you're considering Princeton, to just make sure you guard your heart and know that some of your professors may want you to be apostate. So there's that. But yeah, I think that's less so the case in the seminaries that I mentioned. But by far, it's far less the case.
Another question that was asked to me, how on earth do we think we're going to get ordained once we go before a presbytery and they figure out, of course, because they do background checks, they figure out who we are in our relation to Presbyterians for the Kingdom? How on earth are we going to get ordained? Do you think that that's going to be much of a problem?
Actually, I think that in a way, yes, and in a way, no. There's going to be activist presbyteries who are just like leftist activist presbyteries. I'm talking that are basically puppets of More Light and Covenant Network that are just like it doesn't even matter if Presbyterians for the Kingdom. Like if you're conservative, like you're persona non grata. Now, statistics would say that their churches are dying out the fastest, and the conservative churches are growing. And so there's going to be definitely a whittling down of the number of presbyteries in the PCUSA. I think right now it's like 165. Wait, 167 maybe. I don't know. One of those two. And it's like some of those presbyteries have like 2 pastors in them. So there's going to be a lot of merges by the time we finish seminary. I mean, I'm a senior at my university, and by the in 3 years, whenever I finish, it's like it's going to look very. I mean, we're probably going to shed another 80,000 members, or however much. And what that means, though, is that there's going to be conservatives who stay and are going to have a bigger voice. Now, in another sense, that dynamic is already playing out. For instance, at First Pres Hollywood, that is not necessarily a conservative friendly. I mean, like they can be amicable, but it's not necessarily like a conservative presbytery like you would call something like San Diego Presbytery or Washington Presbytery. But they allowed First Pres Hollywood to call a PCA minister. And so, I mean, I think that being involved in Presbyterians for the Kingdom is actually going to be a plus in some presbyteries, and it'll be a minus in some presbyteries. I think that that there's already such a pastor shortage in the PCUSA. I think like 50% of churches don't have a full-time pastor, that it's not going to matter all that much what you do. Like if you have a pulse and might confess Jesus as Lord, then they might ordain you. Which is something that the second part is what we wish to change, but yeah, I don't think it's going to be a huge detriment, but I do think that it could be an impediment in some places for sure.
Yeah. There's another question I was going to ask. So you think it's kind of yes and no on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would err more on the side of no, but it does because the presbytery is regional, which has been a thing for forever. There's going to be some presbyteries that are, more left wing, some more right wing, some center right, some center left, some center. And I think that in a majority of center left presbyteries, I don't even think it would matter that you were ordained or not ordained. Sorry, well, you were involved in Presbyterians for the Kingdom, but in the like hard left presbyteries, yeah, it's going to matter.
So what are some of the most conservative for people who know and keep on the lookout for jobs open in these presbyteries, like pastoral jobs open in these presbyteries? What are some conservative presbyteries left in the PCUSA?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just off the top of my head, Washington, San Diego, Huntingdon, Shenandoah, did I say Central Florida? Maybe I'm not sure I did. But
you haven't said Central Florida, but
Mississippi. I mean, there's Coastal Carolina, Charleston, Atlantic. Long Island is actually not a bad place for conservatives, believe it or not. And then you've got a lot of places like Redstone in Pennsylvania. Like almost all the Pennsylvania presbyteries are very conservative, except for Philadelphia. And but yeah, I think that there's a lot of churches in those presbyteries. Like if you're listening to this and you're a PCA pastor or an OPC pastor and you don't have an active call, or you're a EPC pastor, don't have an active call, and you want to like help affect change, that's like, they would approve you. And there's churches just waiting, churches like with buildings, right, that are waiting for someone like you to come in there and preach. I think, I think it's something like only 1 in 5 church plants is actually successful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so Tim, I'll just say this, and this is like kind of getting in the weeds, but Tim Keller, my uncle calls him Mr. PCA. He actually sent people from his congregation, Redeemer Presbyterian in New York City, to Central Presbyterian Church, which was a beautiful, it still is a beautiful church, but it was a beautiful PCUSA church that was liberal. But he sent so many members that because it had become so liberal and was dying, they ended up actually leaving for the EPC, but it is a conservative church. So what you can do is I wouldn't advocate for someone to leave for the EPC, but you can follow a similar model. There are buildings out there, and that's the main impediment for church plants is buildings and coming up with money for buildings. Mm-hmm. And there are just buildings out there, and you can say, look, we'll send you, instead of sending people off on road church plant missions, you can say, we'll send you 50 members to this 10-member church, but you're going to adhere to the fellowship essential tenets, or you're going to adhere to this. Now, you can either take it or you can not exist in 5 years. Mm-hmm. But I think that a lot of sort of branch off denominations can be helpful in this movement like that. And I also think PCUSA churches who are healthy and planting churches need to look at that too and just say, look, there's a church where we want to plant a church already there. Mm-hmm. Let's go and let's affect change and, prevent this church from dying out and honor the money and the sacrifice that men and women put into that church for years.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and then my next question: where are the most liberal presbyteries that you think are in the PCUSA?
Well, Olympia Presbytery for sure. Mm-hmm. There's a church there that should remain nameless, but the pastors had 5 different heart surgeries, and they didn't let this church call a new pastor because they were a conservative church and wanted to call a conservative to lead them, and they would not let them call a new pastor. And so, quite understandably, they're actually leaving the denomination for eco, because the guy has been trying to hold on, to safeguard his church for forever. So that's one for sure. Mission Presbytery, my that's the presbytery I was raised in. That one is, let's just say, pretty off the rails. And not only that, potentially, I was told by a pastor in Mission Presbytery that University Presbyterian Church in Austin, which my grandfather went to and my great uncle built, basically, which is now a really, really left-wing church. They just bring University of Texas students to Presbytery meetings, or just, young Austinites, and they have voice votes, and they just people are voting who are not even members of the church, and not much less elders. And it's all for left-wing causes and all that. And so Mission for sure, but if you're quiet enough, you can get ordained in Mission, I think. I know people who are ordained in Mission who are good, but that one, I would say Cascades is pretty out there. Um, you can be quiet and be ordained in San Francisco Presbytery, but that's definitely another one. Um, Richard Ackerman's old presbytery in New York. Trying to think of it. I think it's like the Presbytery of Upper New York or something. Is like, yeah, that one's out there too. But I can think of a lot of presbyteries that are, mainly in the middle, where as long as you're not like coming in with a red cross on a white cape, pulling out a sword, like you'll probably be good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, like, and I mean that is a crusader, not anything else. But um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if you don't come with chainmail and a sword drawn, I think you'd be all right.
Dang it.
Yeah, I know. I really wanted to do the whole like cavalry helmet that like has the visor, and just
Oh yeah.
just go full Knox, but no,
Mm.
no, I'm just messing around. But yeah, there's a few of them out there. Um, Basically, all the ones that concurred with Olympia Presbytery on the Olympia Overture, I would say are probably pretty unfriendly, but
Mm-hmm.
you can try.
Yeah. Right. Well, hey man, it was good having you on. I hope to have you on again sometime soon, man. Thanks for
For
coming
sure,
on for
man.
the conversation. Yes,
It's a
sir.
pleasure. It's a
Yes.
pleasure. God bless.